Morning, Devdutt.
Good
Lovely to
morning.
see you here today. Uh, this is the book that we're going to be talking about. It's called 100 Reflections on the Harappan Civilization, Ahimsa, written and illustrated by Devdutt Patnaik. So, Devdutt, you've been a mythologist for a long time now. Why Harappa?
So I was interested in the mythology of Harappa, and basically how did these people imagine the world? So with mythology you understand how different people imagine the world. And for example, if you go to a temple, you work on temples, a temple reveals an imagination of a society. Um, Harappan, when you see the art, and we don't have any stories about Harappa, we don't have any stories, and all we have is some symbols. We don't even have rituals. All we have is architecture and art. So I wanted to figure out, just looking at architecture and art, can we figure out what the Harappans probably imagined? That was my goal. What is the Harappan myth?
Okay,
And so that was because it was a challenge, having worked on mythology of India for about 30 years now, this seemed to be a place I should go.
right. And I'm glad you did this because the Harappan seals and whatever little we have is found in all our textbooks, and all of us have grown up reading something about it. So these seals are really tiny, and we don't even have a script, we don't have a language, we don't have their oral tradition. So how did you go about doing what you did?
So I rely on what, there's a vast amount of scholarship, right? It's not that I have discovered the seal or anything of that sort. So these seals are just the size of a coin, literally a coin. But scholars have figured out these seals are not found in graves. They're not found burial sites. They're not found inside homes. So Harappa is a vast civilization, hundreds of cities across 1,000 square kilometers, like vast. These seals are found in cities which are separated by 500 kilometers. And in the city, where are they found? They're found at gateways. At the entrance, they're only found near gateways, which means they are part of a regulatory system. And now scholars are fairly confident these were financial documents, some kind of regulation of raw materials and finished goods, not as a logistical document, because if this is logistical document like a postal stamp, it would be everywhere. It is like a tax stamp or a legal document. That's why it's located only in some places. And the design of a seal is very strict. The material used is steatite, which is found only in one part of mountains in where the animal is located, where the symbols are placed. It is all very designed, exactly like, let's say, a government of India document. You'll have a lion in one place, you will have a symbol in another place. If you show a currency note to a person, every currency note will have exactly the same design. Harappan seals have the same design, indicating it is institutional, indicating it is fiscal. Now, the moment it becomes institutional, the moment it becomes fiscal, it means that these are communicating. This is a society which controls. There is a lot of control in Harappa.
And I think somewhere you say even their graves are controlled, the measurements in the
Everything is
grave.
controlled. How do you figure out if a person is controlling? You observe an obsession with measurements. For example, ancient Egypt is highly controlled because the statues have the same design for 3,000 years. For 3,000 years, the bas reliefs of Egypt were exactly the same, which means creativity is not allowed. If creativity is not allowed, it means central control is allowed. It's all based on central control. And that's exactly what especially if it's over a long period of time. So you realize that Harappans are whoever was controlling Harappa is a controlling civilization. And that is how you analyze the mythology of Harappa.
So, what you're also saying in the book is because it is a civilization which highly controls, the religion and the mythology that they used may have been much more personal gods and goddesses rather than like a public god, because we don't have, I think you make this point somewhere, that we don't have like one big temple in the middle. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
So, see, we know nothing about Harappa. The thing is, when you look at, when you see a civilization, why do we assume it needs to have a temple?
Hmm.
So you are projecting your own personal bias. And I see, when originally they found Harappa, they started saying this seal is the proto Shiva, this is the citadel, this is the mother goddess,
The priest king.
the priest king.
Yeah.
And this word is for 100 years. This is
Yeah.
the 100th anniversary of
Yeah.
Harappan discovery. Now everybody uses this word,
Right.
and it has become like real. And now you have to argue, like, how did you come up with the word like temple or center or worship? This is what Harappa forces you to. Why do you imagine a culture which existed 4,500 years ago to have a priest, to have a goddess, to have a deity, Pashupati? Why do you use these words? Where are these words coming from? And that is what you, as a mythologist, for me, the first thing is, why are we imagining this? Is it the imagination of the historian? Is it the imagination of the archaeologist? Is it their imagination? Where is this imagination coming from? So when I look at Harappa, for example, you have to come, the only way to study a civilization which is silent, or in fact any civilization, is to compare and contrast them in two ways. You compare them with contemporary civilization. So you compare them with ancient Egypt. The pyramids were built at the same time as the Harappan cities were being built. The ziggurats in Mesopotamia were being built exactly when the Harappans were being built, cities were being built. So that is comparing over space. You can also compare it over time. So you see what has happened in that region, that is the Indus River region, over the next 1,000, 2,000 years. What changes? And that will help you understand. And you realize that the idea of God is not quite there the way we understand it.
Hmm.
They do seem to be worshipping trees. They do seem to be holding animals as sacrifice. These two things you're fairly confident about, because there's a clear image of a man bowing to a tree
Hmm.
from where some woman is coming out. We're not sure if it is a woman, but
Hmm.
there is probably a woman
Yeah.
coming out.
Because these seals are really tiny.
Tiny.
Right?
And it's very difficult. See, normally in Stone Age art, when they want to show the genitals or to show the gender of the person, they'll exaggerate.
Hmm.
In case of women, they'll exaggerate the breasts or the genitalia. In case of men, there is no exaggeration happening. So it obviously is not important.
Hmm.
It's not important for that artist to exaggerate the gender. It is, and many of the images have both what we consider to be male and female costumes. So the headdress is sometimes male, the back hood is female, bangles are seen in men and women. So you are not 100% sure who is the male, who is the female. The hairdo of the men has a double bun. Most probably males
Right.
have it. Women cover their hair with a hood. So when you see a hood, you say, oh, female. When you see a double bun, you see male.
Hmm.
When you see bangles, you are like, okay, the famous dancing girl who is not dancing actually
Yeah.
has bangles in her hands made of ivory.
Hmm.
Not ivory, sorry, shells.
Conch shells,
Conch
yeah.
shells, which is even today worn by Indians.
Yep.
On left hand. But you have images where there are bangles on both hands.
Hmm.
So you start asking the question, what is their imagination of gender? What is the imagination of divinity? What is the imagination of control, power? What is their imagination of happiness? All those things start emerging.
Right. And I think it's very appropriate that we are having this talk in Kerala, because that ancient tradition of being close with nature, maybe having a lot of private domestic gods, continued in Kerala for a long time. I mean, we have all our big temples, but Kerala has that unique tradition of Skava, where each family will have their own temple It'll be snakes. It'll be, though, interestingly, no snakes in
No
Harappa.
snakes in
No
Harappa.
snakes in Harappa.
I mean, there is probably, it's an argument, like little image, like it looks like an earthworm.
Okay.
But you can say it is a snake, a nag.
But the fact that that community probably saw these kind of animals as totemic symbols or ritual objects or divinity in them, I think would be very comfortable for somebody growing up in traditional Kerala. And even the conch shells that you mentioned, both Tamil Nadu and Kerala did a lot of trade on conch shells. No, none of us wear it today, but in fact, I believe the word valai, which I'm sure in Malayalam means bangle. In Tamil, valayal is bangle. Valai is also the name for a conch.
Oh.
So the bangle comes from the conch.
Oh.
And you have valai is the word. So I'm sure we would have been very, very comfortable in those days with these kind of concepts from Harappa. So I don't think when you're saying that those ancient traditions in Harappa somehow continued to permeate Indian society even today, I think you're fairly on the
So
right
what
way.
happens is, typically people will look at the Harappa and they'll jump to the Rig Veda, the oldest Vedic text. Rig Veda has no reference to shells. And even the word samudra, like there is a big argument whether it refers to water or a large body of water, or does it mean sea? Because sama udara. So it doesn't, we are not 100% sure it refers to sea. But there is no shells. So when we talk about, Mahabharata, Krishna has a conch shell. What is interesting is Vedic scriptures don't refer to conch shells.
Okay.
It appears in the Mahabharata. It's not there in the Ramayana. Ram is not blowing any conch shell.
Right.
Krishna is blowing conch shells. Mahabharata has the conch shells. But in Harappa is the first place you find conch shells, and the conch shell is used to make bangles. You don't see images of people blowing the conch shells. And this practice today is there only in Bengal.
Yeah.
But now see, you're telling me that in Tamil Nadu, there is this word. And by the way, the unique feature of Indian civilization is bangles. There are no bangles in China. There are no bangles in Mesopotamia. There are no bangles in Egypt. They have bracelets.
Right.
Like tight bracelets, but they don't have bangles. Bangles come very clearly from Harappan, and they're obsessed with bangles.
Yeah.
And bangle is the thing which is unique about it. Small things like that we don't get.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example of why Kerala becomes important is because here you have family and marriage practices in 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, which is not what we consider today to be the norm. Right? You have trading communities which had relations with sailors who came from other parts of the world. So they didn't have marriage as we understand it. The people today are looking at these practices from a post-industrial coupledom heteronormative concept. But Kerala had a very different way of functioning. And I keep telling people, if 200-300 years ago, you have a state in India which had a very different approach to property rights, marriage, why do you assume, like there was recently a book for children produced on Harappa. The first scene is father and mother with a child.
Too many assumptions.
Too many assumptions. How do you know there is a marriage? Why do you assume there would be one wife or one husband? And why would they be So these are assumptions, and children have to be taught that when you study history, don't bring your assumptions into because there is nothing in the architecture which tells you marriage. Or for that, there is
Sorry, I got to say, for that, one of the most important parts I thought of the book was that list of about 12 or 13 biases that you list down.
Yeah.
And it's a really important thing that you look at a small seal and unconsciously so many of our biases will come.
Yes.
Right, left, center, top, down,
So,
whatever.
You talk to a right-wing person, he will find something Vedic in the Harappa. You talk to a left-wing person, he will say it was an original utopian Marxist utopia. You talk to somebody from who likes Dravidian, he will say, oh, this was a Dravidian civilization and they spoke Tamil, which obviously the North Indians don't like, and they will say that, oh, no, it's all there in Haryana. So you're like, am I reading history or am I reading these people's politics?
Yeah.
So that becomes very funny about Harappa.
I think before we're almost going out of time. So There are 3-4 iconic images of Harappa that we all remember: the priest king, the dancing girl, the loos and the lavatories and the town planning, and the Pashupata seal. What is your take on that in a few lines?
So the priest king image, what we call priest, we don't know whether he's a priest, we don't know he's a king. I would even argue, how do you know he's a man? You know, because it could be a person wearing a beard.
Hmm.
So, you know, Hatshepsut, the queen in Egypt, wore a beard. A wooden beard was being worn. So, we have assumed the gender, but okay, let's most probably male, most probably. And on his head, there is what is not most interesting is on his head, he has got a circular disc, which is also there in his arm, and it's a concentric circles. That's exactly the design of the Nazar mark, which is found in Turkey today. These Turkish Nazar, you find them even now in every shop, amulets. And the color is turquoise blue, lapis lazuli blue, white steatite, and black steatite. All four things which were exported by Harappa. And Harappa was famous for inlay work. That's the interesting thing in the priest king. Dancing girl. She's not dancing, she's a girl. But I don't think a woman standing like this necessarily means a dancer. And you find that pose not just in this one image which is there in Delhi. By the way, it's only 10 centimeters high. Same image is found in Karachi Museum. There is one again holding the hand like this. There is a pottery where this girl is holding. So this hand movement is not dance or casual pose. It has a ritual significance. And that is nobody's talk. What is the ritual significance? The three images in three different parts of Harappa have exactly the same pose. The priest king image which we talk about is not just found in Harappa. It is also found in Dholavira. Right. It is also found in Iran. It is also found in Central Asia. And all of them are broken. As if they are to be broken. The iconoclasm has happened. We don't know why. Professor Bishtas talked about it. Talking about Pashupati seal, in Vedas, when you say Pashupata, it means cattle. Pashu, in Malayalam, Pashu means cattle. The animals over there are not cattle. They are wild animals, one. They are all found in the seals. So they are totem, emblems. They are all male and they are wild animals. So rhinoceros, tiger,
elephant,
wild goat, elephant, wild buffalo. All male which are found in the Harappan seals. So they are a congregation of the clans. Like the Kadambas are based on the Kadamba tree. Every clan had a tree and an animal. So this is the clans in Harappa had these animals and they're coming together around this person. So it seems more like a team meeting. It is like the parliament in session where everybody has come to fight with each other. And that's what you see in that Pashupati. So it's Pashupati distracts you from what is actually happening.
right.
But most important is what you said about toilets. Every Indian knows about the Harappan toilet. They don't know about Harappan trade. That this civilization took, the cover of the book is blue in color because it is lapis lazuli. Lapis lazuli is only found in Afghanistan. It was brought from Afghanistan via the Indus River up the Makran coast to the Persian Gulf to Oman, Bahrain. So we talk about Gulf trade. Kerala is famous for the Gulf. The first Gulf trade was happening with Harappa. And, that's the reason we selected this topic, because the land which knows Gulf the best. Yeah. But Harappa is the one which established Gulf first. Oman, Bahrain, Iraq, what is Kuwait, and those places. And they took 4,000 kilometers, 4,000 years ago, they are taking lapis lazuli. And children in India know about the toilets, not about the trade.
Yeah.
And that's sad.
Very sad. And I think we need to talk about that in a place like Kozhikode, because this was, in a way, the trading capital of India, even about 200, 300 years ago. So what were Harappa people selling and what were they buying?
So selling is easy to find out. We know that it is lapis lazuli for sure. Carnelian, which is red color stones, which is from Gujarat and Maharashtra side. I mean, these are the two big things. Then shells from the sea. But they also took animals. Chicken went to the world. India gave the world chicken. Wild chicken comes from India. Yeah. The buffalo, which domesticated in India, was taken there. So they have buffalo images over there. India was sought for peacocks. So when you see Persian art, later, they will always show peacocks. Peacocks are not
Yeah.
in Persia. They came from India.
And if I'm not mistaken, the Hebrew word for peacock is tokai or something
Yes,
like that.
tokai. So blue tokai now. which is
Tokai is what we would in Malayalam or in Tamil would be the feather of a peacock.
feather of a, so peacock was exported, but what was imported, we are not sure.
We're not sure.
The most interesting thing is this is a very insular culture. They did not did they import raw materials? But Harappa didn't need anything. It was a very rich. They probably the only thing they didn't have is bitumen. Bitumen is tar, and tar is what they needed because their toilets and their drainage systems they needed bitumen. So bitumen is definitely an import item. By the way, Indians also exported cotton. Cotton, indigo, what we previously was called granaries is probably a workshop for weavers. So India used textile trade. You know, the problem with textile is it doesn't survive. But they found enough proof to show that Harappa was exporting cotton. So these are the major export. But I think they were not, people call them luxury goods. They were not luxury goods. These were magical talismans. Because if you see the Mesopotamian thing, you know, we don't realize the power of ghosts and spirits and people in those days.
Of that
Even
time.
today, you know, if the Babajis are the most popular and make more money than
Oh,
anybody
yes.
else. Like, you don't have to do any business. You just have to be a Babaji and you'll make money.
You can be a rationalist outside, but you'll be worried about black magic.
Yeah. And then, you know, the most educated people will believe in Babajis who can bring
Yeah.
vibhuti from here and there.
Yeah.
India was the land for those magic. And
Yeah.
even then, they are taking these wonderful amulets, green color amulets, blue color amulets, black color amulets, and they are being worn by Mesopotamians who were terrified of ghosts. Demonology of Sumeria, they were terrified. There were ghosts in every corner. And this is what magically, and I believe, now this is my thesis, there's no way to prove it. The obsession with this cleanliness and toilets was because they didn't want anyone to touch these magical stones.
Right.
So you go inside, you take a bath, you do the workmanship, you put it in these sealed jars and you export it. And that raises the value of the product, saying that it is untouched by anybody. You know, even today you say nobody has touched it. You know, what Naivedya, when we say
of course.
Chishta, it is not touched.
Yeah.
And my argument is that the obsession with cleanliness that you find in Harappa has nothing to do with hygiene. It has to do with purity.
And I've heard this old Malabar story, so some people here can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe in old Kerala, sometimes it is very perfectly normal to say Kulucho first, which is have you had a bath?
Have you had a bath?
Just like have you eaten today? And I think 1,000 years later, or maybe a few thousand years later, the trade that happened in South India between Kerala, Tamil Nadu together and the same region was fairly similar. I think we just added on a lot of pepper. We added on a lot of ivory, which is all unique to Kerala. But this tradition of the importance of measurements, which is really important in trade.
In temples.
Exactly. It just continues in temples today. And how you build a temple, so many rules on governance of what to put where and how to do it. This obsession with cleanliness in a temple. I think
And I'll give you something very interesting. Cultures which are obsessed with measurement are also cultures which are non-violent. Because why does there violence? Violence happens because I am not getting my fair share. Violence happens when I'm not getting what I feel is fair or just. Measurement is imagined to say this is fair because I can measure input, output, investment, return. So measurement, so you'll have the Jain community, which is ahimsa, ahimsa, ahimsa. They're obsessed with measurement. Buddhist traders who are obsessed with measurement. When you go to Mesopotamia, you will not find a single measurement. You will find multiple measurements because the cities would fight with each other. It's like the metric system should be follow. America still follows miles. It doesn't follow the international metric system. It is establishing its independence. Entire Harappa had the same metric system, the same measurement system.
We're talking about Pakistan, Punjab, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Haryana. It's a huge landmass.
So we are talking about these 5-7 regions. Mountains, rivers, coasts, and over 500 years. Consistency over a vast geography, this shows these people were conflict averse. They didn't want to fight. And therefore, measurement was a way of maintaining balance. That measurement plays, so you can measure debt, equity, all those trading communities have all these measurements, and that's what you see. And that's my argument. This is a trading culture. Therefore, they are averse to violence, or at least they find ways to minimize violence. And therefore, they are gated communities. They, you keep your thing, I'll keep my thing. They have very little weapons, very little war, very little. I mean, there is hardly any sign of violence. And the only artwork you don't find images of war. You find images of people being separated from fighting. Again, no one in the world has it. You don't see this in Mesopotamia. You don't see this in Egypt, where a person is separating two people from fighting.
We'd rather see a gory battle scene, no?
Yeah, and
Most
no, and even when archaeologists look at this image, they will say two men fighting over a woman. I'm like, it's a tiny image. How did you decide these are two men, first of all, fighting over a woman? Why can't we imagine the woman is separating the two men?
Too many Bollywood movies.
And most archaeologists are male.
Yeah.
You read the writings of a Shireen Ratnagar, women archaeologists, you see a very different way of approaching the same problem. That's why diversity is important.
Yes.
Because they approach the same data they ask very different questions. I think one of them asked the question, what were they eating? And therefore, we know that Harappans ate masala. So, masala is Harappan. Bangles are Harappan. Sindoor probably is Harappan. Thali is Harappan. Measurement, all these gold, they use gold and they use ratti, which is a measurement which is even used today by goldsmiths. Even today, 4,500 years ago, we are using exactly thing. So you do find a continuity. It doesn't have to go via the Vedic route. It can be a extra Vedic route.
Absolutely.
Which is what, I mean, this kind of a simplistic assumption, like, Sangam literature is very important to understand Harappa. Veda is important to understand Harappa, because Veda does have certain references which you find only in Harappa. So, but when you see the whole thing, you realize that Harappa is like the mother civilization, a mothership. It is the first thing which comes, and then it sort of over time becomes Vedic, over time becomes Sangam, Vedic in the northern Gangetic plain. As it moves along the coast and comes towards the Kaveri side, it becomes Sangam. So you see these two ideas emerging from Harappa. So that's...
And I think also the point of how their thought could have been very different. It could have been very focused on trade and commerce rather than land acquisition and battles. And all of these will reveal themselves to us only if we're also conscious of what bias we have and what kind of questions, and that will determine the questions that we ask. There's just one more question that I wanted to check on with you, which is about writing books, and particularly this one. Your thoughts on how you approach this topic, how you split the chapters, the illustrations. We'd love to hear that.
See, I write books like a maniac. So the thing is, when I have an idea, I first write the summary of the book. So the last page is always written first, the blurb, because it helps me focus on what I'm trying to communicate. So it's a very business-like approach. I'm like, what we do in the corporate world. I will first write the summary very, very clearly, and then I will work a lot on the table of content. So most of my work is table of content. So those who have worked or collaborated with me just see, they get very irritated. I said, till the cupboard is not designed, I cannot put a book inside. So first I will design the cupboard properly and I know what to place where. Then I start writing, and then after and I'm controlled by the size of the book, because booksellers are very particular about cost.
Yeah.
So you say that, okay, I want to write about Harappa, but I cannot be more than 300 words or 200 pages or something like that, 30,000 words or something. But illustrations are important to me. I illustrate all my books, and even this book is illustrated because I am trying to communicate and make them imagine a world which is all in the imagination, right? It's, all the Ramayana, Mahabharata, Puranas, whether it is the Quran, anything. You want to talk any religious idea, mythological idea, Harappan imagination of how they lived, it's all in the imaginary space. And I want people to imagine it. Otherwise, you'll think Hamar Chitrakatha is history. You need alternate. So here I've shown Harappan women making butter. How do you imagine a person in Harappa, because we know that they made butter. Dairy farming was very important in Harappa. We know they made ghee. How did they do that? How did the potter look? How was the potter dressed like? And even today, that belt over there in Haryana, in Pakistan, they still have pottery,
Yep.
similar pottery. Um, I'll give you an example. The handi which we use for cooking, cooking, is there in Harappa. But in Gujarat, they don't have handi. They used to have these open pots which were used for, because Gujarat has millet, ragi, while wheat was grown in Punjab. So the cooking wheat is very different from the way you cook millets and porridge. So in my book, so I said, let me talk about plants, animals, minerals. Then let me talk about, in this book, talk about culture, talk about architecture. Take a person from geography to history to philosophy. First to artifacts, to art, to trade, to economics, to possible politics. And then you start, only when you understand all this, you start imagining how did they imagine the world. And that, for me, I call it proto-monastic orders. They are proto-monastic. They're very clearly monastic. They're clearly mercantile. Trading communities slash people don't realize that trading communities are mercantile communities across the world. So measurement, mercantilism, and measure. So you have to build your story to build a case, and that's how you write. So you write it like you're trying to explain an idea to a child, because I don't write for scholars. I write for general public. So I will take it. It's not easy because you have to, and then you slowly build the case. So you write and then you illustrate, and that's how the book happens.
Lovely. So in conclusion, just wanted to give you a sense of how this book is an excellent way to understand not just the Harappan civilization, but also to look at how a general idea of how they would have lived, a very easy to understand, illustrated way to also understand history a little before and after, because you've got the tables, you've got the geographical movement, all of that. And definitely, I think the part on biases, because it helps, especially when we're looking at history, it helps when to be biased is to be human. I think we all have our own biases, but to be aware of what our bias is and then read history and look for alternative viewpoints, I think that's where the richness and the learning and the application to our own lives happen. And I think that list is also very important. So highly recommended. I'm going to open the floor to questions now, if that's okay. As always, let's have questions and not statements. And please keep your question brief so that we can have many more people asking questions. Yes, sir. I think you had a point.
Despite the uniform urban, despite the impressive urban planning, then your uniform structure and trade-off, Harappan civilization is enigmatic due to the lack of evidence of deciphered written paper. What do the archaeological findings such as artifacts, trade-off in the Harappan people also suggest the cultural values, political organization, and about the Harappan people?
Thank you. That's a great question. What it suggests, one is from an economic point of view, they were primarily traders. This was a mercantile civilization. So they were trading. And all those buildings that we see, there were farmers who didn't live in the city. There were herders who didn't live in the city. When the cities collapsed, the farmers didn't go away. The herders didn't go away. The potters didn't go away. So there was an entire culture outside the city which didn't need the city. The city was not important for the local people. The city existed for Mesopotamia to supply goods. The moment Akkadian civilization collapsed, the demand collapsed. It survives for a few more generations, struggles, and then it dies. It dies very organically, very slowly. Climate change is another reason given, but I believe it's, from what I read, more and more people are saying there is a end of demand, so supply. So these buildings and architecture which we talk about are like special economic zones. Nowadays we have special economic zones where nobody can enter, only the trader can enter. That control is done with those little coins. So it's really a special economic zones. These were industrial areas, they were warehouses. which were controlling these beads and cloth which was being exported. So what is the political organization is imagining a mercantile network, which is like the only similar culture that people have argued is Venice in Italy. Venice was a city of merchants. And every merchant and that system, by the way, exists in many parts of coastal India. So if you go to Udupi temple, for example, there are 5 mathas which control this temple. Not one, every matha will control, or 8 mathas, I don't know. There are these bunch of mathas, but everybody will have control for 1 year. Then it goes to the next. Then it goes to the next. Now this is it a monarchy? Is it a democracy? Is it a plutocracy? I suspect it was this kind of arrangement which was there. Every clan had its control over some time. And the regulators of this business were probably monks, like the Jains and the Buddhists were regulators of business for much later. So it is a mercantile, economics, monastic, political order. Highly collaborative, avoiding conflict. They didn't like conflict because it's not good for business.
Hi.
Sir, I think you had a question here.
Assume both the Harappan civilization and the Sumerian civilization, both the Harappan civilization and Sumerian civilization are related culturally and even racially. So since we have deciphered the Sumerian civilization and the legends like Gilgamesh and all, through their legends and their deciphering of their script, can we not have more knowledge on Harappa?
Excellent approach, because this is one of the things I had to explore. When you study the mythology of Sumeria, and because Sumeria is what is modern Iraq, and they were trading with Harappa, there is one Sumerian story which deals with a land called Arata. And they are trading, and the king says, I want metal. And the goddess says, I like that land. So he goes to that land, and there are a lot of stories about how he goes to the land and establishes a relationship with the land which makes metal and stone. Then that land says, in exchange, you give me grain because I don't have grain. And what is Arata? Nobody knows. So some people say it is Meluha, which is Harappan. Some people say it is some other land. But in all probability, it is this coastal land, because you have date palms. Date palm grows in that area. You have got wheat coming, but wheat is there also in Sumeria. So what do you offer special in terms of grain? So grain, Sumeria said, I have grain. You have stones. Sumeria did not have stones. All stones came from Harappa. So this story shows the trading relationship between the two lands. Meluha was always considered a land of magic. This was the land, is the way the Kerala was considered a land of magic for a long time, because it's a mysterious land. So they said, this is the land, and I see this magic in the amulets. All those, what is called tabiz. All those beads are not jewelry, they are tabiz. And the moment you call them jewelry, they become secular. The moment you say tabiz, they become religious. And that's all it is. So I feel the story of also the Sumerians were very particular about purity and the ritual practices of Sumeria. So the Sumerian, this lapis lazuli was going to Sumeria not for common people. It was going for the gods. Only the temple would have. Even today, if you go to some of the biggest temples in India, they will say the biggest money is there. If you go to Odisha, they will say the biggest jewelry, the most gold. So the temple was the center which would demand luxury goods from faraway lands, and the entire Bronze Age network was based on temples. So Harappa was a supplier of these temples' most precious objects.
Kohinoor was in a temple. Yeah.
So these things about temple is something we don't realize. And Harappa was definitely the ziggurats. They wanted gold. Bronze, by the way, we think bronze is very easy. Bronze is very difficult to obtain. Bronze was difficult to obtain. Tin was difficult to obtain. Lapis lazuli, they were obsessed with. It was sacred. So I think it is a ritual connection that you find. So I'm fairly confident about the mercantile side. Mercantile connection with Sumeria, the difference is Sumeria does not have central control. It is very heterogeneous. Harappa is very homogeneous, which means there is not necessarily central control. It can also be a control like caste control, because caste can exist. I mean, I'm using the word caste, but it's proto caste. It's not, we don't know what it was, but some form of connection between different communities following the same rituals.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. Hello. It was wonderful to hear from you when you started talking about how men and women interpret the same picture. And my question is related to that. So, according to your interpretation, which is the time when you see that actually women patriarchy in that time, was it even as strong as it is today? I find it stronger. And at the same time, were women involved in the mercantile of doing things, especially in Harappan and Indus? Thank you.
So I think we are we are done with time, but I will just answer your question. So one, we don't know anything. Let's begin with the premise: we don't know anything. What we know is the bones of the women found in the graves are related, which indicates this is a matrilocal society. And like in Kerala, the system was the men will go to the wife's house. The women don't go to the husband's house. This probably was the system there. Now, does this mean patriarchy or not? We don't know. We don't know who made the beads. It could be the women, because we don't have images of that. So, we don't know. Patriarchy typically appears in families once property rights are established. But we don't know whether they had property rights or notions of property. But they did have gates. Now, were they to lock up women or to lock up men? Now, that's up to you.